Hello, everybody. I was going to say, I hope you can hear me, but I can hear myself bellowing, so I'm sure you can too. I'm Elspeth Pridham from the website The Insider, and with me today are Charu Gandhi, who's founder of Elysian Interior Design, Jennifer Manners, who's a specialist in handmade luxury rugs, and on the end there we've got Chris Gaffney. He's the managing director at Johnson's of Elgin, a long-established mill producing fine natural fabrics and home accessories. Now, our topic today is, are luxury and sustainability compatible? So basically, I'm trying to delve into the question, top-end interiors carry a premium price tag, but do they also have to cost the earth? Now, I'm old enough to remember that back in the sort of 1970s, there was a big trend for sort of sustainability, and basically your entire home was knitted out of string. So I'd like to ask you, Charu, is sustainable products now seen as the worthy, which I think they were before, the worthy option or the best option when you're doing an interior design?
So, look, in luxury interior design, there's balancing that with sustainability is a perennial challenge because ultimately someone's gifting themselves this incredible home. So their desires for their home always come paramount at the very forefront of the process. But certainly bringing up sustainability as part of that process has now become much more. We were just chatting even in the last 2 years, you were saying, the change, there's been a certain shift, and certainly as a studio, it feels like one of the sort of, 5 pillars of the discussion point, but luxury interior design fundamentally always comes back to giving a client their dream home or project.
Would you ever feel that you're compromising on the design if you lead them towards a more sustainable product?
So no, because the central sort of tenet of what we do is getting the design right, that has to be the priority. But with how things are evolving and the range of options and the different ways you can get to sustainability, we'd like to think you don't have to compromise it. But yes, if there's a choice, then design does come right at the forefront. But we find more and more when we explain to a client what is the more sustainable, more long-term option, I think there is a bit of a sense that it's wrong to say, I don't want to go with the sustainable option. So I think if you make it a part of the conversation, then you nudge them in that direction. So I'd like to think we haven't, at least recently, not had to meaningfully compromise one or the other.
Yeah, so you would feel it isn't the kind of worthy, there are products out there that you can put into a luxury scheme?
Yes, I mean, even coming to this talk, I very much don't feel like an expert on sustainability, which may be disappointing for some of you thinking, why are we listening to you? But I think what I want to bring to the conversation is to say it's okay if you're not an expert, and it's okay to say you're learning, and it's okay to say you're trying. I think for many years I was very scared to interact with the concept of sustainability because I felt I wasn't an expert. So on the product side, I'm still very much learning what it means for a product to be sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you don't have to be, I think we almost feel if we don't know enough about it, we should be quiet about it,
yes.
But we're all learning.
Yes.
And also, what does sustainability mean? It can mean a lot of things, which brings me on to my next point actually, Jennifer, which I'm going to sort of fire over to you. There's quite a sort of shoulds and shouldn'ts, and I think there's sort of yes to cotton, no to plastic, but I know, for instance, that you have a fantastic rug range that is made out of plastic, so can you talk us through that?
Yeah, with pleasure. I think one thing you just said, which was so important actually to note, is that sustainability is, there are several different things that fall under that umbrella, and one of them are long-lasting products and the lack of disposability and things that will be made to last generations. Those are the kind of things I think that we all need to be working towards, and at the luxury end at all ends as much as possible. The collection of rugs that we make using recycled water bottles, I mean, it's when we kind of came across it with our weavers, the concept was brilliant, and having worked formerly as news journalist, I thought I need to get under the hood of this thing and really find out what's there. And there are a lot of really redeeming aspects of it. Part of it is and the most crucial thing, I think, in the level of the industry we're working on is the high performance. So they're very cleanable, they're very hard wearing, very durable, and that's really it suits a lot of luxury projects, but also it's that long-lasting element of it. I mean, we would have argued quite earnestly that making rugs to order is a sustainable approach to start with. We don't have lots of wastage. We try to really control all aspects of that, and so it's kind of looking at it from a really holistic point of view, and I think that's what's so crucial, and that's why these conversations are so important. And we're all learning. To your point, I'm no expert either.
So you don't get hung up just on the materials.
Yeah.
And how many, just out of interest, how many plastic bottles would typically go into one of your rugs?
Well, that's what's kind of completely shocking. So for a 2x3 meter rug, hand knotted, you're looking at 6,500 recycled plastic water bottles, and they're PET plastic, so they're no BPA, and it's an amazing step for a recycled plastic journey. And another interesting aspect, and I could go on all day long, so I will stop. But yes, exactly, is that to recycle plastic, it can be done in a controlled manner without a huge dependency on energy. And that's the recycled. We use a plant in India where we get the recycled plastic. It has been done largely in not safe settings, and so there's a lot of confusion around it. But to think that you could take a rug and use 6,500 at that small size, if you're doing, we're doing 4 by 10 meter rugs and tens of thousands, it's a brilliant solution. Virgin plastic is only very slightly more expensive than recycled plastic, so it's about creating a market, I think, for
and like you
things
say,
like
and then
that.
they're bespoke hand-knotted rugs, so we are talking about top-end products there.
Yeah.
Can you just talk me, sorry guys, I will come back to you as well, but I know you are very committed to the sustainability, and you don't just make, obviously, these recycled plastic rugs. Can you just talk us through Good Weave, because I know that is something that you're involved with as well.
Another kind of brilliant aspect of sustainability, it's provenance and how rugs are made and where they're made and who's making them, and particularly with something like the craft and the art of rug making. That's something that's so, it's the heritage of those regions, Nepal and India, where we make. So a lot of, for us, we're not there, obviously, every day, and sadly in the last couple of years, not that often. So Good Weave is an organization that spot checks the manufacturers. We submit our manufacturers, and they spot check them to ensure that the conditions are up to standard and that they are adults working on rugs, and not just in the weaving centers, but in every stage. There are a lot of stages that go into making a bespoke rug. The dyeing facility is a whole nother. So it's nice to know that there are organizations out there that are checking for us, because everyone wants, obviously, to know that they're being made ethically and sustainably, and they ensure.
Does this help you, Charu, if you're looking for items for your projects? And just to say, by the way, some of everybody from all three of our panel here, their images are going up on the wall here. Do you rely quite heavily on your suppliers to have done the homework, as Jennifer obviously has, to have the Good Weave certificate?
Yeah.
Because you were saying earlier, you don't have to be the expert, but you need to know the questions to ask.
It's a completely collaborative process. So we actually at Elysian, we have an annual learning program where suppliers come in and present to us once a week, mix of breakfast talks, lunch talks, visits to workshops. And the coming quarter is going to have a focus on sustainability. So we're going to ask everyone participating in it to tell us about their sustainability credentials. And then we, like I said, we're not overtly judgmental. We aren't trying to catch you out and say you're greenwashing, because we're open to understanding what it means for every product. It's so unique where it's manufactured, what it uses, what's the byproduct. So we're just open to that conversation. And so as a studio, we're trying to learn. And then we were talking about the BIID. They've launched a kind of specification guide, which helps you find sustainable suppliers when you're looking for a specific product, and helps guide you, tells you what you should be looking for. So yes, we do rely on our suppliers and then trust them, because ultimately we assume everyone has the same interest at heart. So it becomes a collaborative process. And like Jennifer said, working on bespoke pieces inherently means that you're making things for a project. So you're not specifying extra, you're not doing trial and error, you're making something for that location that will hopefully be right for that property for years and years to come.
And just one thing coming back to you there, Jennifer. I know that you're very anti-tufted rugs. Can you tell us why you hate tufted?
Well, anti-tufted is
okay, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Because
sorry.
actually, tufted rugs are a way of making rugs very quickly and very inexpensively. And how they're made are on a canvas, and they tuft in the wool, and that's all fine. But then they use a latex to back them, and it's at that stage that once the rug is discarded, it makes it really difficult to recycle. It doesn't biodegrade because of all of that latex, and it's the second discarded rugs and carpets are the second biggest contributors to landfills because of that plastic, or not the plastic, the latex on the back that prevents the wool from breaking down. So that's it's one of those kind of commercial conundrums. I mean, I appreciate why people want to use them. The commercial spaces tend to kind of turn rugs over more quickly. So how, for me, I think what could we do with that then? And so what we're looking at is we're working with Imperial College London at a lignin-based glue that biodegrades. So that hopefully that's, I'm way out of my depth on that, but working with scientists.
Isn't it lovely to know that this is going on behind the scenes?
Yeah.
So there are things happening.
There's a reason why tufted rugs are so prolific, but how could you take that and still create a much more sustainable approach to that process?
So it's not, none of this is black and white, is it? It's not about saying, you can't use this or don't use that.
I think my responsibility to educate people, I don't think people would knowingly go and say, who cares, I'm buying a tufted rug, I don't care, it won't biodegrade. There's just a lack of understanding and information, and so I think, to your point, with working with with end clients, it's trying to find, educating them as to why they're inferior in terms of sustainability.
And a lot of it is just finding balance. We can't do everything, can we? But we don't have to say just because it's top-end design, we're just starting with a blank canvas. We can revisit things. Chris, I'd love to come to you now. Johnson of Elkin produce lovely, fine textiles for the home, but you're probably best known for your fashion fabrics. Are there lessons that in the interior industry we can learn from the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think the fashion industry has obviously been on the spotlight to a greater extent perhaps than the interiors industry so far. They've been at the forefront of, for example, cleaning up the chemicals that they use in the fashion industry. There's an example. We're in part of the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals protocol, which the fashion industry has developed to try and improve the chemical usage in dyes, etc. So I think maybe fashion's a little bit ahead, but I think the principles are the same. It's very difficult to be luxury without being sustainable. Luxury, by its nature, indicates quality, longevity, and as you've said earlier on, making something that is long-lasting and that will survive the test of time is probably the most important thing you can do in terms of being sustainable. And it's very difficult to, luxury is really about how you feel about a purchase as well. And if you're going to feel guilty about that purchase, if you don't understand where it's come from and who's made it and why they've made it and what drives that business, it's very difficult to feel good about the purchase. So I think lots of lessons from fashion. We work with a lot of the bigger brands, and it's right at the top of their agenda corporately as well as on an individual basis. So we learn a lot from that, and we feed back to them. For us, sustainability is very broad. We've been around for 220 plus years, and sustainability has been around for the next 200 years. So it covers all kinds of different aspects, from social through to environment through to carbon. And these things have got to be balanced together, and nobody's an expert, as I've already said. You've got to try and balance the different conflicting sometimes elements of those pieces of the jigsaw.
I know an angle that the fashion industry has taken, particularly people like, say, Stella McCartney, that buy better but buy less. That must be difficult for you, because obviously you've got your commercial head on as well, but is that the sort of angle you're trying to promote? Spend a little bit more initially, but then don't replace it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not terribly difficult, because although we are a large manufacturer, relative to the size of the market and relative to fast fashion, we're a drop in the ocean. So we would certainly be encouraging people to be buying natural fibres that are biodegradable, that will last a long time, that you can pass on to other generations. My daughter's got many of my old jumpers that she wears and slouches around in. So so those kind of things are nobody's going to be perfect. I think we've all got to be honest about that. And the big worry at the moment is greenwashing can take hold and people can overpromise. It's really important to be genuine about what you do, and try and live those values. And that's what sustainability is to us. It's about our values.
Mm. No, it's interesting actually. You brought up the greenwashing, and for anyone who's not familiar with that term, it is a manufacturer or a supplier saying that, paying lip service to their green credentials, but when you delve a little bit into it, you find that they're not actually very green. I know that you're founding members of the Sustainable Fibre Alliance, and you also won the Queen's Award for Sustainable Development.
Yeah.
Do you think that helps you as a supplier, that you have actually achieved these?
Yeah, I think
awards?
it's a demonstration that we get stuck in.
Yeah.
The Sustainable Fibre Alliance is a good example. It's basically we source cashmere from Mongolia, and in Mongolia there's some risk that if the cashmere industry suddenly becomes very broad and the mainstream, that there's a risk that there'll be too many goats in Mongolia and that the grassland will be degraded. So about 5 or 6 years ago we got involved in a project to try and educate the herders about the ability that they have to try and influence that by managing their goats on a more sustainable basis. And it's now really exploded in the last 5 years and is becoming a standard that you can now procure your cashmere to that standard, and it's got traceability through the supply chain. So those kind of things are really important to actually do the work underneath the surface and invest in your supply chain. As we'd all say, I think probably the majority of your carbon footprint or your environmental footprint is going to happen in your supply chain rather than in your business. And so you've got to take that time to acknowledge that and to recognise it and to go and learn more about it. And it might not ever be perfect, but the more you know about it, the better chance you have of influencing it positively.
Yeah. And does that help you, Cherry, when you're sourcing products and materials for your projects, that somebody actually has credentials?
Yes, because we then rely on their sort of hard work and solves a big part of the process for us. I think at our end, the biggest thing we can do is help clients preserve, build to last, and invest. And then that allows us, so if we think of that as the framework, so whether it's preserving legacy of a building, thinking carefully before we start breaking things down, can it be preserved, can it be reused, can it be repurposed, restained, refinished? If we can set that framework up for a project, then the next step for us is to rely on our supply chain to support us in that conversation. But really we have to set up the framework, because like Chris said and Jennifer said, if the starting point is that we're destroying stuff that could be retained, we're wasting things, we're building things that won't last, then you could use sustainable fabric, but actually your larger framework has failed. So then I think the specific supplies become less relevant. So I think the framework is where I would say we're focusing the most for what we can do proactively, and then for the materiality, we rely on our suppliers.
That's a really helpful sort of guide to how you start.
Yes.
And I know you had a recent project when there was something about the wooden floors.
Yes, so it's a 8,000 square foot apartment in Knightsbridge, and had a kind of warm oak timber throughout, lots of it, timber floors, doors, joinery, skirting, and the client who bought it wanted a very whitewashed, pale, it'll come up on our images, and wanted us to basically take it all out and put in new flooring, new timber. And we said, look, let us try whether we can bleach back this timber and whitewash it, 8,000 square feet of it. And we had 7 rounds, and actually till the 6th round it wasn't quite working. And it actually affected the lead time of the project, delayed the project by about 4 weeks. But we explained to the client why we really thought it was worthwhile. It was also going to save him money, but for us it was mainly how could we bring ourselves to rip out a brand new apartment. And it worked, and we got there. And so the whole apartment's been whitewashed and looks exactly like the client wants it to look, but we didn't waste a single piece of timber. So that's what I mean. You set that framework up, and then for the individual pieces, you work with makers. But things like the air miles our products incur, That's such a challenging thing to overcome. The air miles are clients in car. You know, how do we? So those, you just have to realize where you can't fight the fight, but you do your bit. You know, like we said, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You just keep doing the bits you can.
Yes, yeah, I think that's such a good turn of phrase, isn't it? And also coming to shows like this, we were having a little chat beforehand, and obviously Decorex didn't happen last year, but 2 years ago, people were muttering about sustainability, but it was round the edges, whereas I feel there is a momentum to this now, isn't there?
It's more at the heart. I find I bring it up with clients much more as sort of part of the conversation, and that's, you know, that's a lovely sort of, it's lovely that that's become part of the framework. I think that's wonderful.
And are there other areas of, we're using the word luxury because how else do we describe it, much as I don't particularly like that word, but are there other areas at the design level you're working at where sustainability can come in? I've talked a little bit about obviously materials, and you're talking about the framework, but are there any other areas in interior design?
Things like when we do rip out stuff, what happens to it? So, you know, we work with Vitruvius, with simple things like actually, you know, now I'm not embarrassed to tell a client, can the team have this? You know, if it's going nowhere, we've got, you know, someone ended up with this joinery piece that they had to pretty much reinforce their floorboards for.
Yes.
But I don't feel, as I say, look, it's more sustainable. You are throwing away half your kitchen. Can someone have all these amazing appliances, you know? So like I said, it's just constantly, you know, so when you're getting rid of stuff, you're thinking of how the people on site are being treated, their well-being. You're thinking of things like the chemicals in the materiality. So things like, I think with surfaces, there's a lot of information out there with paint, wallpaper. So yeah, you try and touch, you know, at every touch point. Every project's unique, as you all know. So I think the best thing probably to do is, when you're starting out tackling sustainability, is maybe deal with the larger items, the big, you know, the bigger pieces in that project that affect you. So it depends on what the project is. But if you are preserving or removing, maybe tackle those big ticket items.
Yeah. And Jennifer, do you find people are asking you about your sustainability credentials more? Or, you know, is that an aspect?
Definitely growing. Definitely growing. And I think it's also kind of married with the performance and function and that type of thing. And they love the idea of being sustainable, but to be able to couple that with a high performance product, then they get really excited. And actually looking at doing carpets, wall-to-wall carpets, and I think due to the high performance aspect of it, and I just think it's a great conversation to have. What I do notice when I go on a project and there are children there, they embrace it, and you know, the concept of it's not the planet, it's our planet. That's something they really seem to.
So they're
to
really
get.
not seeing it as the worthy cause. They're seeing it as it is the conversation to have.
I think a challenge at this level is the word plastic. Everybody hates the word plastic, and so, you know, we're very careful about saying recycled water bottles, and it's you know, when we said to the weavers we want to do rugs, knotted rugs, which are by the time they take much more expensive. We want to use the repurpose recycled water bottles to make knotted rugs, and they said, "You're completely mad." You know, I mean, but what we did with our fibre was that there are a lot of products being made with recycled plastic. By no stretch did we come up with that, but we did take the fibre and we had to bring it to a state that was right for this level, the luxury, the word level, and that makes it almost indiscernible from wool.
So it is a soft touch.
It's very soft.
It's not. It's not plasticky
exactly.
feel at all.
And plasticky in look. You know, it's one thing when we see samples. It's like, looks shiny. No one wants plastic shiny. So it's, you know, constantly looking. I think at a lot of different aspects of still working in kind of amazing luxury, you know, projects and. Building something that will last,
and keeping an open mind, as you said, Cherry, because sustainability can mean all sorts of things, can't it? And I think, and it shouldn't be a tick box exercise.
Well,
it should
actually, one of the things I forgot to mention is this slide shows it now. That's me standing in a marble quarry in Italy. Try, if you can, to understand what you are sourcing. Try to get to the heart of it, and it prompts you to ask questions like, when we are buying this marble slab, and using it for this table, what's happening with the rest? And so what we find we're doing a lot more in projects is using the offcut for the base of a bedside table, for the little side tables. And so actually if you can understand even your raw materials, their provenance, how, what does the original size come in, what bit are you using, what's happening with the leftover, can they store it for you for a future project? I think understanding that materiality, it just over time builds a kind of catalog in your head of how that material works in terms of its geometry, usage, transport, and it starts to become more and more natural to use the spares. I mean, there's companies out there who buy spare leftover fabrics. So when at the end of a project you have, you'll inevitably have bits left from cushions, curtains. We now contact that company so they can come and take away the spares. So understanding your material and the dimensions of its usage is quite useful, actually.
Yeah.
So you understand what's left over.
No, that's really interesting.
I've
So-
just add to that.
sorry,
I think
yeah.
it's actually a great reservoir of creativity that we're seeing now because of that kind of upcycling, recycling, and reuse. People are being much more creative
Circular.
about what they do with things.
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, we've got a range where we take batch ends of yarn that are left over that were maybe a colour that was for a season that's no longer relevant or for a particular manufacturer. And we'll give those to our designers at the end of the season, and they'll come up with fantastic, intricate
Amazing.
designs, and weave up a range that we call every yarn that we'll then sell.
Yeah.
So it's
How
it's quite an opportunity as well for creatives to come up with really interesting ideas to use things like that.
No, that's really interesting, isn't it? Literally, rather than throwing it away, you're putting the challenge out there, make something beautiful out of.
Well, we have several
what's
of the
left
team who have had skirts made out of upholstery fabrics. That's another way of
Fantastic,
using it.
quite right too. So do you think in general, panel, that we can sort of reverse the thinking that I think there was in the 70s that sustainability is worthy? Can we almost make things to be considered luxurious because they are sustainable? Because do you think that seems to be the way with your
Yeah,
company,
definitely.
Chris?
I think it's being sustainable is a luxury itself to some extent. We're quite fortunate, I think, in that generally speaking, many of us can afford to buy things that are well made, that will last, and that will be sustainable because of that, and are made using sustainable practices. That's not always the case. And in some areas, fast fashion, for example, that's much more difficult for the mass market. So I think we have to set an example as luxury of how you can go about doing that and try and bring others with us,
Yeah.
through that endeavour.
Yeah.
So it's very important.
And do you feel that I'm not saying you single-handedly, but in general, the movement, do you think it is changing that attitude, as Chris says, that, sustainability,
Yeah,
it's luxurious
definitely.
because it's sustainable?
I don't think we're considered. I don't think we're quite there. We're considered more luxurious because of a sustainable. But I think it's a conversation. I think to Chris's point, that's it. People do. It is the top of the interiors market,
Yeah.
and people do tend to lead from the top. And so I think from that point, it is turning it into the idea that we do work quite hard, and there is a lot of expense even with recycled water bottles. There's still a lot of expense that goes into working with those fibers and the research and all of that and developing. So I think it's our job to kind of present it in a way that it is a premium and hopefully something that will trickle down.
Yeah. I think we're seeing it already at the show. I mean, there are stands here, and I think if anybody went to Planted at King's Cross, the show there very much looking at sustainability and beautiful level of furniture and furnishings. Right, that is nearly, we've done half an hour, unbelievably. We are going to have some questions from the audience if you want to at the end, but I'm just going to do a quick fire round. Can each of you suggest one thing that could make us more sustainable? It could be a big thing or just a small tweak that you've done in your life. I'm going to start with you, Chris. Have you got any suggestions?
Our latest project is that we've just applied to become a B corporation.
Uh-huh.
And a B corporation basically changes the whole way that the company's founded in a way, and writes into your articles of association that you're not just there for the profit motive, you're also there for people on the planet as well. So it's quite a big change in terms of our operating documents and what we're there for, our purpose. For us, it's a relatively straightforward transition because as a family company, those are the things that have driven the company for a long time anyway. But I think by formalising it and by going with that designation, we're also having to test ourselves against other companies that are doing the same thing. So that's a big thing that we're doing in the next short while. It's quite important to us.
And again, that helps with the whole greenwashing thing, doesn't it?
It does. It makes sure that you've got to have the foundations in place, and it's very rigorous. So.
Yeah. Cherry, anything you can suggest?
Mine would be to work with British craft or British represented craft. I think in sustainability, the conversation of handmade versus machine-made, what does that mean? And I think certainly where I am in my knowledge journey is, I think the handmade and the craft and the person producing something, I think encouraging craft and giving purpose to that so it passes on through the generations, to my mind, like you said, is a form of social sustainability. And I think we're very lucky being actually in Britain, where how professional our world is, and how people, when they say they're doing something, are often following through. So I think if you continue to invest in British craft or British represented craft, I think you're in very safe hands. So I think that would be my one suggestion.
Tip.
Yeah. Very top. Just one.
I know, sorry.
Well, I think as a business, I think one thing we're looking at, we're actually trying to educate the people we're working with in Nepal and India, and having conversations about the dyes, and if they think I'm mad for doing knotted rugs, I think that's it's kind of making them, creating an awareness there. I can tell you that this whole thing, it does become a bit of a lifestyle, and that personally, you kind of start, I think over the lockdown with myself and 2 children at home, was kind of aghast at how much plastic packaging is used, and it does make, it's kind of, I'm not an activist, but it does galvanize me toward banning single-use plastic, and I've traded in my gas-guzzling SUV for an electric car, and you just can't, once that conversation starts, I think you just can't keep it in one area. You can't help but start,
but
as
that's
you
wonderful,
educate
isn't it?
yourselves.
So it snowballs, and like you
does.
say, I mean, the single-use plastic thing, I feel like quite nervous about it now, and I think that's absolutely it. You start adopting these small things, and you think, well, if I'm doing this, now I can do that, and then that's great for
And we didn't see it when we were moving from work to, another meeting and kids at school and and to see it. It's and I think since then, as you go digging around, you find out there are a lot of organisations out there fighting against single-use plastic, and so then personally you think, how could we support that in this country? What
what can we do?
And I'll stop.
No, don't. I've got a top tip as well, and I have to admit that this I stole from interior designer and friend Chloe Bullock, and she said to me, because she's a big one for sustainability, is never remove fire labels from furniture. Because as Charu mentioned earlier, there are organisations who'll take away fabrics and bits and pieces like that, and there are a lot of charities who'll take furniture from a project and then sell it, but if the fire labels have been removed, they can't, and it'll go into landfill. So that would be my top tip. Okay, look, dead on past. How good is that? Are there any questions from the audience? I'll take my glasses off because I can't see you. Good, because I've got one. Who do you think is driving this conversation about sustainability? And obviously all 3 of you here are very aware of it. Do you think it is coming more from the suppliers, from the interior designers, or from the consumers?
I would probably say at the heart of everything is consumers. If consumers aren't making a demand, and this is maybe, I guess there was a big push towards green maybe 15 years ago. The financial crisis came, it kind of came back off everybody's radar. But now, the kids, it really is back on the consumer agenda. And I think that's what helps us all be able to drive this more forward. We're all in a situation where we've got various financial and other imperatives we've got to think about. If the consumer's behind this, then we can really get behind it. It frees us to make the right decisions all the time. So I would say the consumer, and then it ripples through the rest. But I don't know what you guys think.
For me, it's my team. Yeah. We have quite a vast age range in the team, but a lot of the team's younger and younger. I'm getting older, team's getting younger. And I was just struck because we asked the team what they'd like to see in the next quarter of the learning program, and every single person independently came back, or a lot of them said, I'd really like to know more about sustainability and our supply chain. So for me, it's coming from the team, and you could say the Elysian team is kind of the consumer because we're buying from the supplier, so it probably resonates with what you said, but my team, for sure,
That's great, So are there any questions? Stick your hands up.
Hi, thank you for this. It was really interesting, and it sounds like you're doing amazing things for sustainability. I was just wondering, I think a lot of people associate sustainability with higher end or luxury sort of products. But do you think there's enough being done to sort of have some smaller projects, being able to afford some of those sustainable products? Because obviously the cost of those is, most times is a little bit higher than, what the average person can afford to put in their homes. I mean, is there something that, do you think can be done, or are you doing anything in your companies to sort of make it a bit more affordable?
I would say, just with rugs, I mean, you can do 150, 200 knot and very high-end luxury rugs, but there are a lot, you can still have a not cost-prohibitive handmade rug in a lower knot count or in a hand-woven, and I think there's a lot of way to bring design that doesn't have to be, the eye-watering kind of price tag, and so I think, actually to Chara's point about the craft and still doing that, I think when you get into the mass production and with that oftentimes comes a disregard for the workers and that whole kind of fast fashion type of thing. There's still ways or to reuse pieces that are handmade, and I would say from that point of view there's a lot of different things to use that are still well made, that could be used in a smaller project with a smaller budget, and that would be sustainable.
And I mean, don't maybe not assume that it can't be done. So if you have a project budget, it's very specific, but if you have a budget, you have your typical list, and then maybe you create a list in parallel of what does it really mean to swap with the most sustainable paint. You may be surprised at the cost differential, and maybe it can be accommodated, and maybe you do something else a little bit less, and then you can accommodate it. So I think maybe question that perception, and maybe actually the actual incremental financial impact may not be quite as meaningful. And again, if you can't do it across the project, you do it in 2 materials and you've still made a start. So but I think I would drill down to the specifics, because I used to think like this, gosh, it's all going to cost more. But actually when you actually do a project budget and line by line match it up, it's not necessarily true.
I think I'd come back to that leadership point earlier on, really about the difficult thing with a lot of sustainable materials is getting critical mass into that marketplace. So if luxury is leading and creating the demand initially, then these things can be scaled more easily. So that upfront investment can be made by luxury brands, but then everybody else can come in behind it, hopefully. So we'll maybe start to see a bit of that happening too.
Oh, there's a lady here.
Hello, I've just got a simple question. How do you deal with contractors? How do you deal with contractors who are very hard to budge, particularly with paint finishes and so on, or paint colours? They tend to stick with their standard brands. Very tough nuts to crack.
I think it depends, I think it depends on the procurement route you're going down with your contractors. So if you're doing a traditional contract, then you should really be able to specify the exact paint you want to use. If you're doing a design and build and you're saying you want an ivory, then technically under a design and build contract, a contractor can match it as long as it looks the same. So we've never done a project other than in a traditional contract setup with the contractor, because we want to be very, very specific. And so if your contractor won't budge, then you need to change contractors because there'll be another contractor out there who will and maybe put it at the forefront of the conversation to say, I'll give you this contract if you will work to my exact specification. Because certainly in our world we do ask for people to fulfill our exact specification.
Anybody else? Okay, I think we're done. We are going to linger about at the back of the hall, so if anybody does want to have a quick conversation with me or any of the panellists, we're at the back. But I would just like to say a big thank you to Chris, Charo and Jennifer, because I think you've been absolutely fascinating. So thank you for giving your time and thought on that.